27 Days is the next book in the series, and it's the beginning of a three-book mini-series in which Nick Crane takes on his enemies, the Principles, who are a group of alt-right extreme conservatives who are intent on basically destroying democracy in the United States in every way they can. Is the first published book in the three-part miniseries in which Nick Crane fights his adversaries, the Principles. And in particular, two of the Principles, one whose name is Thomas Quincy and the other's name is Margarita Ferguson. So they're kind of his like blood enemies. Somewhere along the line, I'd become acquainted with the idea that there are lots of things go on in our society and our government. A lot of stuff goes on, behind the scenes, behind closed doors. And it's very hard to know. A great example of that is the Kennedy assassination. Well, what really happened? I mean, who knows? I greatly respect a writer named Peter Dale Scott. He was a UC Berkeley doctorate in English of all things. But he kind of developed the idea of deep state theory in the United States. And because he's a scholar, he never makes any statements he can't prove. He's, does a great deal of research. Peter Dale Scott is on the level, without a doubt. And so it can be the idea that there are forces trying to undermine our democracy or control our democracy in various ways. And so for 27 Days and Rogues and Patriots, instead of now, if we go back to my first published novel, Cicero's Dead, I think it's a good, valid story, but it's typical of crime fiction in that it's, kind of escapist in nature. In other words, you can read the story, you can get all wrapped up in the story, and you finish reading it, and you might remember the characters, you might have identified it, but you don't, the issue is not very important. The issue in 27 Days, in Cicero's Dead, so typical. It was like a kidnapping. A sister's younger brother is kidnapped or disappears, and she wants the PI to find him. So in that sense that, I wasn't breaking any new ground. And so with 27 Days, I wanted to write, a page turner, a crime thriller, a regular page turner that would keep the reader hopefully on the edge of their seat, that would also make the reader think a bit, about society and the problems we face. And by no means, you read 27 Days, by no means does it require you to ruminate and get depressed over the state of America. But, but that side of the idea of very powerful forces working to undermine our democracy, it just struck me as an important idea. And so I wrote it, and it's interesting with January 6th in the insurrection. It's like, in many ways, 27 Days is kind of prophetic. Because, when I wrote it, and I can remember with Michael, the former CIA guy who helped me get my first blog started. He thought after Trump was obviously soundly defeated in the election and he wasn't accepting the results, most of us thought, well, there's going to be a lot of talk and demonstrations and this and that, anti-election demonstrations, but nothing serious is going to happen. And so Michael, who had been in the Philippines for 4 years doing an attempted coup d'etat, and he wasn't at all sure. He thought, something really terrible could happen. And of course, as we know, something terrible did happen, and it could have been so much worse than it was. And so in that sense, 27 Days is historically accurate, I would say, in that it brings up this issue of powerful right-wing extremist forces trying to undermine democracy, our democracy, in various ways. I tried to make 27 Days not a simple plot, but not an extremely involved plot either. So in order to create tension, to ratchet up the tension, I put Nick Crane in a position where to rescue Bobby Moore would at least superficially seem to be flat out impossible. How are you going to do it? You can't rescue him unless you find him. How are you going to find him? It's true, you're a seasoned private investigator with a lot of experience finding people. But, where is Bobby Moore? Nick has no way of knowing. And so that's how the plot develops, where he goes to the Midwest, where Margarita Ferguson is holding massa rallies, Make America Safe Again rallies, obviously, built on the idea of the ex-president's rallies. And so that begins the process by which Nick slowly and kind of laboriously eventually learns where Bobby Moore is being held, which is, half the battle, but it's the easy half in the way. Is almost as difficult as it was to locate Bobby Moore. Now Nick has to rescue him, liberate him in the only possible way. And fortunately, by this point, Nick has hooked up with a young, idealistic, I hesitate to say progressive, but at least liberal FBI agent named Carrie North. And she has it in for Margarita Ferguson. She wants to bring Margarita Ferguson to justice. And so she's hugely helpful in Nick going through the necessary steps to hopefully, I don't want to give much away, but to hopefully liberate Bobby Moore in the end. It would have been impossible without Carrie North, FBI Special Agent Carrie North. And they clash a lot at first because, she's an FBI agent. Nick is an independent private investigator. He's kind of skeptical, generally speaking, about law enforcement. But they go a few rounds, but they learn to really respect and like one another. Margarita Ferguson is his main antagonist. And she's married to a coal country billionaire. And she's done various things. She worked for a consortium called the Roach Brothers for many years. Doing speeches and, that kind of thing. She's also very heavily into the private prison industry. And she basically, and it's unavoidable. We can't really escape the issue of racism or culturalism that comes into this. And that Margarita Ferguson and her cronies, they really do not want, they want a more exclusively white America. And how are they going to achieve this? Well, in reality, they're not going to achieve it. It's not going to happen. But, the idea of private prisons, locking up Latino immigrants, locking up Muslim immigrants. So there are the two groups they pick on, directly are, the Latinos and the Muslims. Those are the groups they most dislike. But Margarita Ferguson, she has an animus against Nick Crane that is just gigantic. She wants to destroy him in the most painful way possible. And so in order to do it, as you know from the storyline of 27 Days, she arranges for her people to kidnap Bobby Moore. Bobby Moore is Nick Crane's closest friend, business partner. He's known him for 30 years. He met him in San Francisco when Nick actually went to SF State when he came out here from upstate northern Minnesota right after high school. And so Bobby Moore is kidnapped. And Nick is informed the three main principles that Nick has dealt with up to this point. There's Margarita, there's Thomas Quincy, who is his main antagonist in 27 Days. Main antagonist in Rogues and Patriots. By the time 27 Days comes along, he hasn't been silenced, but he's kind of working at 75% capacity. And so Margarita becomes the main antagonist. There's a third principal, Desmond Cole, who's the chameleon. He's like a man for all seasons. And he kind of delivers messages, does that kind of thing. And he informs Nick Crane that, Nick, you have 27 days to either rescue Bobby Moore or turn yourself into us. And we will release Bobby Moore. So it's the devil's own bargain. Nick obviously has to do everything he can to try to liberate Bobby Moore. And in writing this story plot-wise or storyline-wise, what I decided to do, I wanted this story to be plot-wise, to be a bit simpler than Rogues and Patriots. Readers of Rogues and Patriots will discover it's a longer, more involved plot. It's not a longer book, but there are a lot more plot pieces. But 27 Days, before it, there's a prequel to 27 Days, and that's called Rogues and Patriots. I wrote Cicero's Dead, and then I wrote Rogues and Patriots. And with Rogues and Patriots, I was working with a well-known Hollywood film producer, a man named Peter Hoffman. And he taught me a lot. He taught me about how to write a complex storyline with the necessary ebbs and flows. Now, in the third book in the series, which I'm working on now, which is called, the working title is Giant Steps. In it, Carrie North will be a very important character. She's already a very important character in 27 Days, but she's going to be front and center for a lot of Giant Steps.